I never imagined that a woman in a beige cardigan and orthopedic shoes would become my mortal enemy. But Susan Chen had a special talent for making the impossible feel inevitable. The day she decided my driveway was her personal shortcut changed everything. Not just for me, but for every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates who'd ever felt the cold grip of HOA tyranny around their throat. This is the story of how a power-drunk board president learned that property lines aren't suggestions, they're laws, and how her silver Lexus SUV became the most expensive lesson in boundary respect this subdivision has ever seen. Buckle up, because what started as tire tracks on my lawn ended with flashing blue lights, a tow truck, and the most satisfying email I've ever sent to 247 homes. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm a patent attorney, a detail that becomes critically important later. I bought my corner lot at 1247 Oakmont Drive 3 years ago, attracted by the mature oak trees, the spacious yard, and the promise of a friendly, well-maintained community. The house was a classic craftsman, with a wraparound porch, slate blue siding, and enough character to make the premium price tag feel justified. The property line was clearly marked in the survey documents, a straight shot from the iron post at the northeast corner to the boundary stone at the southwest, giving me a generous side yard that backed up to the community park. Everything was perfect, documented, legally sound. Then Susan Chen got elected HOA president. Susan had lived in Willow Creek Estates for 17 years, long enough to know every rule, every loophole, and every homeowner's business better than they knew it themselves. She was the kind of woman who measured grass height with a ruler, who photographed trash cans left out past 7 p.m., and who could recite the CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, from memory like scripture. She wore her authority like armor, always carrying a leather-bound planner and a smartphone loaded with photos of violations, ready to ambush residents at the mailbox or the community pool. Her husband, David, was a quiet man who seemed to fade into the background of their immaculate colonial, a ghost in his own home. The trouble started innocently enough. Susan lived 3 houses down on Oakmont Drive, but her property backed up to the park from the opposite side. The most direct route from her driveway to the park entrance was a straight line that happened to cross my side yard, specifically the corner where my property met the community space. For months I'd noticed tire tracks in the grass after heavy rain, shallow ruts that suggested someone was cutting through regularly. I assumed it was maintenance workers or park visitors who didn't know better. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late April when I first caught her red-handed. I was working from home, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee, when I heard the distinctive crunch of tires on grass. I looked up just in time to see a silver Lexus RX 350 rolling across my lawn, crushing the periwinkle I'd planted along the property line just 2 weeks earlier. The driver didn't slow down, didn't hesitate, just carved a lazy arc from the street, across my corner lot, and onto the park path like she owned the place. I ran outside, my coffee still in hand, arriving just as Susan emerged from the driver's seat. She was dressed in cream-colored slacks and that damn beige cardigan, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that matched her tight expression. "Excuse me," I called out, jogging toward her. "You just drove across my lawn." Susan turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as if I were a subordinate who'd forgotten his place. "The park entrance is right there, Marcus. I'm dropping off supplies for the spring social committee." "The park entrance is accessible from the street," I replied, keeping my voice level. "You drove across my property. You killed my flowers." She glanced at the crushed periwinkle with the enthusiasm one might reserve for stepping over a dead bug. "Those flowers were too close to the property line anyway. Section 4.7 of the CC&Rs states that landscaping within 3 feet of common areas must be pre-approved by the HOA board to ensure aesthetic consistency. My jaw tightened. This isn't common area. This is my private property. The survey is clear. The survey is outdated, Susan said dismissively, pulling a folder from her passenger seat. The original plat from 1987 shows this corner as park access. I've been meaning to schedule a resurvey to correct the records, but in the meantime, homeowners need to be considerate of community needs. The park belongs to all of us, Marcus, and frankly, your insistence on blocking access is selfish. I stared at her, disbelief mixing with rising anger. Blocking access? There's a paved entrance 30 yards that way. You drove across my lawn because it's convenient for you. I'm the HOA president, she said, as if that explained everything. I have responsibilities. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do for this community. Work that benefits everyone, including you. She walked away, leaving me standing there with cold coffee and crushed flowers. I wanted to yell, to chase her down and explain basic property rights, but I knew better. Susan Chen wasn't the type to be swayed by logic or courtesy. She was the type who needed a legal 2x4 to the face. That evening, I pulled up the plat maps, the survey from my home purchase, and the CC&Rs. The documents were unambiguous. The property line was exactly where I thought it was, and there was zero mention of any park access easement through private lots. The outdated survey line was pure fabrication, a power play designed to intimidate me into compliance. Susan had simply decided that driving through my yard was easier than taking the street, and as HOA president, she believed she had the authority to rewrite reality. I sent her a polite email that night, attaching the survey and requesting she use the designated park entrance. Her response came at 6:42 a.m. the next morning. Noted. However, I encourage you to review Section 2.3 regarding community harmony and cooperation. Homeowners are expected to be flexible when supporting HOA operations. See you at the spring social. The tire tracks appeared again the next day, and the day after that. Each time, Susan would drive her Lexus straight across my corner lot, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. She wasn't just using my property as a shortcut. She was establishing dominance, demonstrating that my boundaries meant nothing to her. I planted more flowers. She crushed them. I put up a small decorative border fence, the kind with wrought iron posts and wire mesh, barely 18 inches tall. Susan sent me a violation notice claiming the fence was unapproved and aesthetically inconsistent, and she drove around it, widening the path of destruction. By mid-May, my side yard looked like a war zone. The grass was torn up in a muddy trench, the flowers were obliterated, and my peaceful corner lot had become a source of daily stress. I complained to the HOA board only to discover that the board consisted of Susan, her neighbor Dorothy, who nodded along to everything Susan said, and a retired dentist named Phil, who admitted he only joined to get a discount on pool fees and didn't care about drama. Drama. I filed a formal complaint with the county about the property encroachment, but the clerk told me it was a civil matter, and I'd need to pursue it through small claims or hire an attorney. I was an attorney, of course, but patent law and property disputes were different worlds. Still, I knew people. I called my law school friend Alicia, who specialized in real estate litigation, and explained the situation over lunch. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Marcus, you're going to love this. Document everything, every tire track, every crushed plant, every email. Then we'll set a trap she won't see coming." "What kind of trap?" "The legal kind," Alicia said with a grin. "The kind where she commits a violation so clear, so documented, that she hands you the lawsuit on a silver platter. Trust me, I've dealt with HOA tyrants before. They always overreach. Always. So I documented. I installed a discreet trail camera on my oak tree, angled to capture the corner of my property in crystal-clear 4K video. I photographed the tire tracks, the ruined landscaping, the muddy trench. I saved every email, every text, every snarky violation notice Susan sent my way. I even hired a surveyor to reconfirm the property lines and provide a certified report, complete with GPS coordinates and iron stakes driven into the ground at each corner. The surveyor, a grizzled man named Tom who'd been doing this for 30 years, shook his head as he worked. "Lady's got some nerve," he muttered. "This line is clear as day. She's trespassing, plain and simple." June arrived with a heat wave, and Susan's entitlement hit a new level. She started parking her Lexus on my property, not just driving across it, but leaving it there while she attended committee meetings in the park pavilion. The first time, I sent a text. "Susan, your car is parked on my lawn. Please move it." Her response, "Relax, Marcus. It's just for an hour. Stop being difficult." I didn't relax. I took photos, checked the trail camera footage, and watched as Susan laughed with Dorothy and Phil, gesturing toward my house like I was the neighborhood villain. The camera captured everything. Her arrival, her casual dismissal of boundaries, her smug expression as she drove away 90 minutes later, leaving fresh ruts in my grass. The final straw came on a sweltering Saturday in mid-June. I was hosting a small barbecue for colleagues, showing off the backyard and the porch, when Susan's Lexus appeared again. This time, she didn't just drive across the corner. She parked directly in the middle of my side yard, blocking the view of the park and sitting there like a monument to her arrogance. My guests noticed. One of them, a senior partner at my firm, raised an eyebrow and said, "Marcus, is that woman parked on your lawn?" "Yeah," I said, my jaw clenched. "That's the HOA president." "You're kidding." "I wish I was." Susan emerged from the Lexus 20 minutes later, carrying a box of decorations and chatting on her phone. She glanced toward my porch, saw me and my guests, and waved, actually waved, like this was completely normal. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the problem. Just walked into the park, leaving her SUV on my property like a territorial marker. That was it. That was the moment I decided Susan Chen was going to learn a lesson she'd never forget. I excused myself, walked inside, and called Alicia. She just parked her car on my lawn in front of my colleagues, I said, my voice tight. "Perfect," Alicia replied. "How long has it been there?" 20 minutes and counting." "Good. Here's what you're going to do. Call the non-emergency police line. Report an unauthorized vehicle on your private property. You've got the survey, the photos, the video. This is trespassing, Marcus. Make the call." My heart pounded as I dialed. The dispatcher was polite, professional, and asked if I'd requested the owner to move the vehicle. I explained the situation, mentioned the repeated violations, and confirmed I wanted the vehicle removed. "An officer will be there shortly," she said. I walked back outside, my pulse racing. My guests had moved to the backyard, but I stayed on the porch, watching Susan's Lexus sit there in the afternoon sun, baking on my property like a silver insult. 15 minutes later, a Willow Creek police cruiser rolled up, and Officer Martinez stepped out, a young woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You the homeowner?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Marcus Webb. That Lexus has been parked on my property without permission for almost 40 minutes now. The owner is in the park." Officer Martinez glanced at the vehicle, then at the property line marked by Tom's fresh iron stakes. "You have documentation of the boundary?" I handed her the certified survey, the photos, and pulled up the trail camera footage on my phone. Her expression shifted as she reviewed the evidence, surprise giving way to something like admiration. "This is pretty clear-cut trespassing," she said. "Let me go talk to the owner." I watched as Officer Martinez walked into the park, disappearing toward the pavilion. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an eternity. Then I saw them. Susan, striding toward her Lexus, with Officer Martinez beside her, her face a mask of indignation. Dorothy and Phil trailed behind, looking confused. Susan's voice carried across the yard as she approached. "This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I have every right to—" "Ma'am," Officer Martinez interrupted, her tone firm, "you're parked on private property without the owner's consent. That's trespassing. You need to move your vehicle immediately." Susan turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Marcus, this is absurd. We've been using this corner for access for years." "No, Susan," I said, stepping off the porch. "You've been using my property without permission. There's no easement. There's no access agreement. You've been trespassing, and I've asked you repeatedly to stop. I'll have you brought up on charges with the board." "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said again, "move the vehicle now, or I'll have it towed and issue you a citation." Susan's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she snatched her keys from her pocket, climbed into the Lexus, and reversed off my lawn with enough force to tear up more grass. She didn't look at me as she drove away, her tires squealing on the pavement. Officer Martinez turned to me, handing back the survey. "You might want to consider a more permanent barrier, Mr. Webb. Legally, you're in the clear, but I have a feeling this isn't over." She was right. That evening, I received an email from Susan, CC'd to the entire HOA, claiming I had harassed her with a frivolous police call and that I was hostile to community values. The email included a photo of the iron stakes, labeled as aggressive, and unsightly markers that violated aesthetic guidelines, and she announced an emergency board meeting to discuss my pattern of non-compliance. I printed the email, added it to my growing file, and smiled. Susan had just made a critical mistake. She'd escalated in writing, doubling down on her claim to my property in front of 247 witnesses. And I was about to show her exactly what happens when you cross a patent attorney who's done his homework. Because the real revenge hadn't even started yet. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community center, and Susan made sure everyone knew about it. She posted flyers on the bulletin board near the mailboxes, sent 3 separate email reminders, and even knocked on doors personally to ensure maximum attendance. She wanted an audience for my humiliation, a public trial where she could reassert her authority and make an example of the homeowner who dared to challenge her dominion. What Susan didn't know was that I wanted an audience too, just for very different reasons. I spent the week preparing with the thoroughness that had made me successful in patent litigation. Alicia coached me through strategy sessions, helping me organize the evidence into a presentation that would be impossible to refute. I compiled every photograph, every email, every timestamp from the trail camera footage. I obtained copies of the original subdivision plat from 1987, the updated survey from my home purchase, and the certified survey I'd commissioned from Tom. I even researched Susan's tenure as HOA president, discovering a pattern of similar overreach with other homeowners, threatening letters about fence heights, demands to repaint houses in approved colors, fines for holiday decorations left up too long. One neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Griswold, had been fined $800 for leaving his trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours. Another, a young couple with twins, received a violation notice because their children's chalk drawings on the driveway were deemed visual clutter. Susan Chen wasn't just a bad HOA president, she was a tyrant who'd been building a paper empire of petty cruelty, and nobody had ever pushed back hard enough to stop her. That was about to change. Thursday arrived with perfect summer weather. Clear skies, gentle breeze, the kind of evening that makes you grateful to live in a place with parks and oak trees. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, white shirt, no tie, professional but approachable. I loaded my evidence onto a laptop and packed a portable projector I'd borrowed from work. Alicia had offered to attend for moral support, but I'd declined. This wasn't about having a lawyer intimidate people. This was about showing my neighbors who Susan Chen really was, using her own actions as the weapon. The community center was packed when I arrived at 7 o'clock. Every folding chair was occupied, and more residents stood along the walls, whispering and casting curious glances my way. I recognized most of them. The Johnsons, from 2 streets over. The Patel family who always waved during evening walks. The retired couple who'd welcomed me with brownies when I first moved in. They were good people, decent people, who'd simply never questioned the system because questioning Susan seemed like more trouble than it was worth. Susan sat at a folding table at the front of the room, flanked by Dorothy and Phil. She wore a burgundy blazer over a white blouse, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking every inch the competent administrator. A stack of papers sat before her, undoubtedly the evidence of my violations she planned to present. When she saw me walk in, her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. She didn't need to. Her expression radiated confidence, the absolute certainty that she controlled this room and everyone in it. "Let's begin," Susan announced, banging a gavel, an actual wooden gavel, against the table. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session. We're here tonight to address a serious matter involving one of our homeowners, Marcus Webb of 1247 Oakmont Drive, whose recent behavior has threatened community harmony and violated multiple provisions of our CC&Rs. She launched into her presentation with practiced ease, displaying photos of my decorative fence on a screen behind her. As you can see, Mr. Webb installed this unapproved structure without submitting an application to the Architectural Review Committee. Section 7.2 clearly states that any fence, wall, or barrier requires written approval before installation. This fence is not only unapproved, but it's also poorly positioned, encroaching on what has traditionally been community park access. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few people nodded, accepting Susan's framing without question. "Furthermore," Susan continued, clicking to another photo, this one showing Officer Martinez talking to her in the park, "Mr. Webb weaponized local law enforcement to harass me while I was performing my duties as HOA president. He called the police on me for parking near the park entrance, a space that has been used by board members and volunteers for years without complaint. This kind of hostile, antisocial behavior undermines the spirit of cooperation that makes Willow Creek Estates a wonderful place to live." She paused for effect, glancing around the room. "Now, I want to be fair. Mr. Webb is new to our community, and perhaps he doesn't fully understand how things work here. But we cannot allow one individual to disrupt decades of tradition and mutual respect. The board recommends a formal warning, removal of the unapproved fence, and a $500 fine for the harassment incident. Mr. Webb, would you like to respond?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I stood slowly, picking up my laptop and projector, and walked to the front. "Yes, Susan, I would. Thank you." I set up the projector quickly, connecting it to my laptop and aiming it at the screen Susan had been using. She watched with growing unease, her fingers drumming on the table. "This better be relevant, Marcus," she said. "Oh, it's relevant," I replied. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you something that might surprise you. It surprised me. and I'm a lawyer who deals with documentation for a living. The first image appeared on the screen, the certified survey of my property, with the boundary lines highlighted in bright yellow. This is the official survey of 1247 Oakmont Drive, completed in April of this year by a licensed surveyor. As you can see, the property line runs along this corner, marked by iron stakes at each boundary point. This survey matches the original plat from my home purchase and the subdivision records from 1987. There is no easement, no access agreement, and no provision for park access through my private property. I clicked to the next slide, a satellite view of the neighborhood with property lines overlaid. Here's an aerial view showing the designated park entrance from Oakmont Drive, approximately 30 yards from my corner lot. There's a paved path, ample parking, and clear signage. There's no reason for anyone to drive across my lawn to access the park. Confused glances passed between neighbors. Dorothy leaned toward Susan and whispered something, but Susan's face remained frozen in a mask of composure. "Now," I said, clicking to the next slide. "Here's where things get interesting. Over the past 2 months, someone has repeatedly driven across my property, destroying landscaping, creating ruts in the grass, and even parking on my lawn without permission. I documented every incident. The screen filled with photos, tire tracks cutting through the periwinkle, the muddy trench across my side yard, the crushed flowers. Gasps echoed through the room. I let the images sink in before advancing to the next slide. I installed a trail camera to identify the person responsible. Here's what I found. The video began to play. Crystal clear footage showed Susan's silver Lexus entering the frame, driving deliberately across my lawn, crushing plants beneath its tires. The timestamp was visible in the corner. June 3rd, 9:17 a.m. The video continued, showing Susan exiting the vehicle, walking into the park, and leaving the SUV parked on my property for over an hour. I played 3 more clips, each showing the same pattern, each date stamped and undeniable. The room erupted in whispers. Mr. Griswold, the elderly man who'd been fined for trash cans, stood up and pointed at the screen. "That's trespassing! She's been driving across his lawn?" "Every day for weeks," I confirmed. I clicked to the next slide, a compilation of emails and text messages from Susan, including her dismissive responses to my requests that she stop and her claim that the survey was outdated. I read several aloud, my voice calm and even. Homeowners are expected to be flexible when supporting HOA operations. Stop being difficult. I'm the HOA president. I have responsibilities. The energy in the room shifted like a physical force. People were no longer looking at me with curiosity. They were looking at Susan with recognition. This was the same woman who'd fined them, threatened them, and bullied them into compliance, now caught in her own web of entitlement. "Susan," I said, turning to face her directly, "you told this community that I installed an unapproved fence to block park access. The truth is, I installed an 18-inch decorative border to protect my property from ongoing trespassing. Trespassing you committed repeatedly, despite being asked to stop. You told this community I harassed you by calling the police. The truth is, I reported an unauthorized vehicle parked on my private property after documenting months of violations. That's not harassment. That's enforcing my legal rights." Susan's composure finally cracked. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd. You're twisting the situation to make me look bad." "I'm showing everyone what actually happened," I interrupted, "with dates, times, photos, and video. You claimed my survey was outdated. It isn't. You claimed there's a tradition of park access through my property. There isn't. You claimed I'm hostile to the community. But the evidence shows you're the one who repeatedly violated my property rights, ignored my requests to stop, and then retaliated by calling this meeting to publicly shame me. I advanced to the final slide, a legal letter from Alicia's firm, addressed to the HOA board and Susan personally. This is a cease and desist letter regarding the ongoing trespassing and harassment. It also puts the board on notice that if this behavior continues, I'll pursue legal action for property damage, emotional distress, and abuse of authority. The estimated damages, based on landscaping costs, property devaluation, and legal fees, are approximately $15,000. The room went silent. Phil, the retired dentist, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Dorothy stared at Susan with something between shock and betrayal. And Susan looked like she'd been slapped, her face pale and her hands trembling. "You can't do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm the president. I was doing my job." "Your job is to enforce the CC&Rs fairly, not to use your position to violate other people's property rights," I said. "And here's the thing, Susan. I'm not the only person you've done this to." I clicked one more time, revealing a spreadsheet I'd compiled after talking to neighbors throughout the week. It listed every fine, every violation notice, every instance of overreach Susan had committed over the past 3 years. Mr. Griswold's $800 trash can fine, the young couple's chalk drawing violation, a woman named Lisa who had been threatened with legal action for planting roses too close to the sidewalk, a man named Kevin who had been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway because it was deemed commercial and thus aesthetically inconsistent. 17 homeowners, I said, letting the number hang in the air. 17 people who've been fined, threatened, or harassed under your administration, Susan. And that's just what I found in 1 week of asking around. How many more are there? The crowd erupted. People started shouting, some at Susan, some at Dorothy and Phil, some just venting years of pent-up frustration. Mr. Griswold was on his feet, demanding a refund. Lisa was crying, telling her neighbor about the lawyer fees she'd paid because she was too scared to fight back. Kevin was red-faced, yelling about the principle of the thing, about how his truck was his livelihood, and Susan had treated him like a criminal. Susan tried to respond, tried to regain control, but her voice was drowned out. She banged the gavel, shouted for order, but nobody listened. The authority she'd wielded so ruthlessly for years evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw anger of people who'd finally seen behind the curtain. Phil cleared his throat and spoke into the chaos, his voice surprisingly loud. "I move that we table this matter and conduct a full review of Susan's actions as president. This," he gestured at the screen, "this isn't what I signed up for." "Seconded," Dorothy said quietly, not meeting Susan's eyes. The vote was unanimous. Susan's motion to fine and censure me was dead, replaced by an emergency investigation into her own conduct. She gathered her papers with shaking hands, refusing to look at anyone, and walked out of the community center into the warm summer night. Nobody followed her. Nobody said goodbye. After the meeting, neighbors surrounded me, shaking my hand, apologizing for not speaking up sooner, sharing their own stories of Susan's tyranny. Mr. Griswold clapped me on the shoulder, tears in his eyes. "I thought I was alone," he said. "Thank you for standing up." The following week moved quickly. The HOA board launched a formal investigation, and within days, more complaints surfaced. It turned out Susan had been skimming money from the community fund to pay for personal expenses, things like her spring social decorations, which she claimed were HOA investments, but had actually been used to decorate her own home. She'd also been selectively enforcing rules, ignoring violations by her friends while targeting anyone who questioned her authority. The board, now consisting of Phil and two hastily appointed new members, voted to remove her as president and demanded restitution for the misappropriated funds. Susan resigned entirely from the board in late June, citing health reasons and ungrateful neighbors. She put her house on the market a month later. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to a condo in the city, a place with no yard, no HOA presidency to lord over, and, presumably, no neighbors to terrorize. As for my property, I reinforced the decorative fence with something more substantial, a beautiful cedar post and rail design that Alicia helped me confirm was fully compliant with all CC&Rs. I replanted the periwinkle, added some lavender and black-eyed Susans, and installed a small stone marker at the corner with a plaque that read, "Private property, no trespassing." Tom the surveyor said it was the classiest screw you he'd ever seen. The new HOA board, led by Mr. Griswold as interim president, issued a formal apology to every homeowner Susan had wronged. They refunded fines, rescinded bogus violation notices, and rewrote the enforcement guidelines to include oversight and appeals processes. Phil admitted he should have paid attention sooner, and he donated $1,000 to the Community Park Fund as a mea culpa. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer, like a weight had been lifted. On a warm evening in August, I was sitting on my porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the park, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alicia. Heard Susan's trying to join the board at her new condo. Sent them a courtesy heads up. You're welcome. I laughed, replied with a beer emoji, and looked out at my corner lot. The grass was green again, the flowers were blooming, and the property line was exactly where it had always been. Marked, documented, and respected. Susan Chen had learned that power without accountability is just tyranny waiting to collapse, and that even the smallest boundary matters when someone decides to cross it without permission. Because in the end, this was never really about a lawn or a shortcut or an HOA president's ego. It was about standing up when someone expects you to back down, about knowing your rights and refusing to let anyone, no matter how official their title, rewrite the rules to suit their convenience. Susan crossed my property line every day until I marked the border with her SUV, and that silver Lexus became the most expensive lesson in respect this neighborhood has ever witnessed. The best revenge isn't loud or violent. It's methodical, documented, and absolutely legal. And it's satisfying as hell. So, what would you have done? Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a power-hungry neighbor who thought the rules did not apply to them? Share your own stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you handled it. And trust me, after everything I've been through, nothing will surprise me. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of justice served, hit that like button and subscribe, because tomorrow we've got another wild ride coming your way. You're going to want to hear about what happened when an HOA Karen decided my mailbox was in her way and dumped it, until I installed one she definitely didn't see coming. That's right. Tomorrow's story is titled HOA Karen Dumped My Mailbox. So I installed one she definitely didn't see coming. And let's just say it involves some creative problem solving, a little bit of local code research, and a whole lot of poetic justice. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, know your property lines, document everything, and never let anyone tell you that convenience trumps your legal rights. Peace out, Willow Creek. And thanks for having my back.